If you're somebody that likes to compare shoes based on the stats and the numbers you see on this channel from shoe to shoe, then this is probably gonna be one of your favorite reviews, because the Air Jordan 12, the stats on this thing and the numbers this was producing on the different tests were so off the charts in so many different directions. It is really insane to see how this shoe stacks up against the shoes of today, not only in Nike and Jordan brand, but also Way of Wade, Anta, some of these other shoes, as well as what this thing was competing against at the time it was actually released in the late 90s. So without further ado, let's get into them. All right, so starting off with the uppers, I'm gonna do this a little differently because the stats are just so insane on this shoe. I'm gonna start with a number. 98.1, and that is the number of degrees these things heated up on the breathability test. Now, how on earth did this thing heat up less than some other shoes that weigh almost half of what these things weigh? And that is because, well, number one, the tongue really isn't locked down into the shoe, but number two, it's just the padding on these allows Nike shoes just don't hold on to heat. Apparently that extends into the Jordan brand and into the retro line, because I did this test twice on the left and right shoe. I did it also twice did it yesterday, and then I did it again today. Still got average 98.1 degrees of heating. And what I noticed is not only was the air coming out of both sides of the tongue, because it is only gusseted just with two little elastic straps, but number two, I could actually feel the air coming through the leather red or whatever you want to call it here on the tongue. So air is flowing through these things. If you look at the breathability mapping on them, as you can see, no fog is getting out of anywhere on this shoe, and that's just because you've got a couple layers, right, of very thick, non-breathable material on top of each other. So honestly, yeah, they handle heat very well, but moisture, there is a lot here that can hang on to all that moisture. So if you sweat a lot, you're still gonna be, feel like this is a swamp on an outdoor court. And there's other reasons why these on outdoor courts aren't gonna be the greatest things on planet Earth if you're trying to wear the 12s, playing basketball today. But if you go up the lace line, the one thing I liked about this is that you have outrigger lace eyelets here on kind of, the second and third to last eyelet, but then you also have an optional last eyelet you can tie all the way up to really make these feel like a true high top lockdown shoe. I noticed with these, either if I was using the high top lockdown or more of the mid lockdown, it really no heel slippage whatsoever. These are actually a little bit tough to get into considering the size of them, which we'll talk about in the fit section. Now, if you look at these on the upper durability test, 10 seconds, highest grit sandpaper, yeah, I mean, that burr just works through that foam like you wouldn't believe. In terms of the foxing and reinforcement guard, right over top of that, I did the durability test on that as well. And no, the burr didn't get through it, but it was working through it pretty good. So dragging and sliding, obviously these aren't going to be the best things on planet Earth. And on an outdoor court, if you're sweating a lot, you're heating up a lot, then obviously these aren't going to be the greatest things on the planet either. However, in terms of lockdown and containment, if you can handle the inflare of them, which we'll talk about in the fit section as well, then yeah, honestly, they're fantastic. All right, beginning into the midsole on the teardown, I'm going to give you two more numbers. 46 and 47, that is the centimeters of bounce height these things got in the heel as well as the forefoot, making this one of the highest bouncing shoes that has ever been tested on this channel. That includes some of the super shoe running shoes we've seen. And the reason for that is because the air in this air unit is so tense. There is so much PSI in this thing. I noticed when I was pressing down on them, when I kind of took the insole out and I was messing around with them, I was like, it does not feel like there is air zoom in there. The only way I could tell there was because you could actually see the dimpling around the outside of it, right? The indentation on the outside where the zoom pouch kind of comes around. And I'm playing on them like they're not uncomfortable, but they definitely feel like they have a lot more tension than a normal Nike shoe does. And then got them in the bounce height test, and I think it was just bouncing to the moon. And when you're on court, you feel it too. I mean, these things are giving a lot back. The next thing is that bottom-loaded carbon fiber shank, number one, is molded. Number two, does cross two zones. It goes from the rear foot all the way to the junction of the mid and the forefoot, and it kind of sneaks there into the forefoot, right? It almost gets to the ball of the foot. And no, the stack on these isn't super high, but when you've got the tooling that you do in the midsole that the 12s do you really need it, right? I mean, there is no way your foot is going to bottom through the ground on this shoe, right? Like even on an outdoor court, I mean, the midsole for an outdoor court is just fine, right? It's more, the other parts of the shoe that don't really allow that. But in terms of a shoe that weighs as much as it does, 19.20 ounces for men's size 11, there's another big number for you. The shoe does not feel like a clunker once you break it in. I mean, at first, yeah, it is very stiff because the entry into it is a little bit more difficult. They break in. I mean, they're comfortable in the uppers because there's just so much padding, as you could see before. But it definitely takes a little while to break them in. But once you do, honestly, I mean, if you're somebody that's a little bit heavier, has stronger legs, this midsole setup, especially if they're putting the PSI in the ones you're getting as well as the ones I'm getting, you know, if that's across the board, then, I mean, people are going to start feeling like these are moon shoes. It's crazy. So typically for full-length Zoom, we don't see super high bounce heights, right? Because there's just a lot of volume in there, right? So, you know, the energy kind of gets dispersed throughout that entire Zoom unit versus the smaller ones where it rebounds really easily because it just, you know, it's in that contained area. I'd like to see what would happen if they put all the PSI in this one in one of the smaller Zoom units and see what that thing does. So, in terms of the midsole, one of the most surprising, one of the most fun midsoles I've had on, and like I said, I think it'd be interesting to see what the PSI was in this batch. Like, did I just get one that maybe had a little bit more in it, or is this how they're shipping out everywhere? Getting into the outsole tread, the number here is 37, and that is where these things slipped at on the grip test ramp. Now, I found that interesting because the grip, when you actually get them on court and warm them up, is actually that of a lot of forgiveness. Now, the durometers are a little bit different from the carrier rubber versus the herringbone on the central portion. The central portion only comes in, I think, somewhere around 12, and then the outer portion comes in around 19. So there is a big difference. The one thing I noticed is, no, they don't feel like they're super glue on the court. They don't feel super tacky, but they do feel very confidence-inducing and very forgiving. What I like is when you come down, you basically kind of roll into the herringbone, right? You get a little bit of flex there because the carbon fiber is bottom loaded. It is a little bit thin, so the shoe does flex. And then you kind of get this, you know, surface area contact, almost like the Curry Flow line gets, Jordan 2 as well. And then you also get, you know, a little bit more of the tactile herringbone. So, you know, when you put these on court and you go to stop, the sensation and the sound they produce is just very satisfying. I guess that's how I can describe the grip on these. It's just very, very satisfying to feel, very satisfying to the ears, and that's kind of how they play. They're incredibly smooth to transition step, and they better be because they are so heavy. But it just, in terms of the feeling on the bottom of your foot, you know, I've seen like the Tatum 2s have come out, and they have a lot of the flat rubber, right? And they got like pods of tread here and there. I feel like it's kind of trying to mimic shoes like this. And it just, in something like this, it just works a lot better because I think, number one, the different compounds rubber, right, the different hardnesses on the two, that number one produces a lot of grip because you're getting two different rubbers basically interacting with the ground and each other at any given time, plus the flex in the rubber down here and just how it interacts and how it transitions step is just so, it's so interesting, right? It just works so well. So no, they're not super tacky, but they are very, very consistent. They also don't hold on to a lot of dust. And considering how bottom heavy the shoe is, you really don't feel unstable really at all in these, even with, like I said, that pretty generous inflare. If you look at the speed ratio on these, come in at 2.72, which is a little bit high for these, and that's basically because of the Zoom Air unit and just how crazy that was. Put it this way, once they break in, you definitely start to lose feeling of that 19.20 ounces for a men's size 11. So they definitely start to feel a little bit better. When you first have them on, yeah, you can feel the weight in them. And honestly, I think later and later in a game, you're gonna start to feel that weight. So 2.72 to me is a little bit overstating it, but still interesting to see a shoe that heavy get this high of a rating. But, and there's always a but, if you look at the outsole durability test on these things, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, yeah, I mean, on the flat rubber, it's kind of hard to tell. It basically scuffs it up. And then on the herringbone, though, I mean, over a millimeter of damage on these. So really, you know, for the moisture trapping as well as the durability on the outsole, there's really, these just aren't great outdoor shoes unless you're basically just doing some shooting around, which in that case, yeah, they're fine. It's just, you start to drag or slide at all, you're gonna start to really ruin the foam on the inside of them. They're gonna start to look a little bit weird. And honestly, I think you're gonna start to ruin the best parts of them because the tread works best when you're utilizing the flat rubber as well as the herringbone. And the most interesting number to talk about when we talk about the fit of the Jordan 12s is 29.3, and that is the length of these things. Also 14, that's the degrees of inflare these things have. These are incredibly long shoes and they are incredibly inflared, which honestly with a shoe this heavy and this big, you kind of need a little bit more of an inflare just so that they don't feel like absolute bricks when you come down on them and you can't move forward. So, you know, the width on them is 9.4 centimeters for men's size 11. These actually are a little bit more forgiving than a lot of other, you know, especially Nike and Jordan shoes. Now, I'd say a narrow and medium foot. If you don't have long toes, you can go down a half size on these just to get the length right? If you're a 2E, honestly, I think true to sizing, these are okay. The entry into them is going to be the hardest thing. Once you break that in, you should be fine. If you want to go up a half size on these, if you've got long toes, I think it's fine because the lockdown is so good. But if you don't have long toes or long metatarsals, long feet, this is going to be a lot in the front of the shoe, right? So there's that. If you're a 4E, I think, you know, if you want to try to break these in true to size, honestly, I think you could probably give it a try. If not, I think up one half size. If you're long toed, right? If you've got really long feet, go up a size on these. That's fine. Just remember, these things are super long shoes. Now, with that in flare comes a little bit of an issue if you do have a tailor's bunion. In terms of somebody with heel pain or ball of foot pain, for a low stacked shoe, like I said, that is pretty high and pretty bulky, it's honestly not terrible. Plus you can fit an orthotic in these, no problem whatsoever. So really, when you're comparing the fit characteristics and kind of the protective characteristics of these, as long as, you know, you're not talking about anything on the outside of your foot, right? Tailor's bunion, prominent styloid, things like that. This shoe is just as good, if not better, than any other shoe in terms of its weight class, right? Mid to highs that are a little bit more heavy shoes meant for bigger players or meant for people with a lot stronger legs. Like I said, I think these do just as well, if not better, than a lot of other shoes in their class today. And I think that fit really translates into their performance, right? Like I said, yeah, they need broken in just because they are so heavy of a shoe and so bottom heavy. There's so much rubber on this shoe. Yeah, but even on first use versus, you know, a couple down the road, there's something to like about them, whether you're trying to break them in, like you haven't broken them in yet, you're kind of getting to that midpoint, and then to when they become a little more buttery on your feet. Like I said, there's something to like. Now, if you're a very lightweight player, maybe a little bit of leg weakness, then yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a tough sledding for you because you need to put a lot of energy into the shoe to get a lot back, right? Especially with the shank, right? Because it is crossing so many zones. Yeah, it's very thin carbon fiber, it's bottom loaded, it's molded, that's all well and good, but it still needs you to be able to put something into it, right? If you want anything back from it, you're gonna have to be able to put some energy into it, right? You're gonna have to be able to put some force in to get a reaction out of it. The Zoom Air, yeah, I mean, it feels bouncy, it feels crazy. It definitely does not feel pillowy under any circumstances, but you can augment that with an orthotic in these. Well, that's the nice part about these. So I would say for a shoe this heavy, yeah, it's the bounciest shoe for this weight, for sure. Does it have the playability of the 11s or the 13s? I don't think so. I think the 11s to me a little bit quicker, a little more snappy. The 13s had a lot more of that tactile sensation, had a lot more of that just rugged grip. I love the profile of the 13s, so I mean, that might be my bias, but my bias comes from, you know, the design of the shoe. So yes, I think that they definitely have a place in today's basketball for the right player, the right, you know, the right body type. The 11 and the 13, I still think are on a little bit of a higher level than these, and I think the 11 and the 13 are still on a little bit of a higher level than a lot of other modern day shoes as well. I think the 12s kind of fit right in with everything else. So if you're looking to get these to actually play in and not just collect or, you know, just kick around in, I think they're fine. I think they play outstanding, and I think you'll get some tools out of them, like I said, as long as you're the right player. So love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, especially if you're picking up a pair of these for actually playing versus, you know, just kicking around in or just collecting. Let me know in the comments down below. And if you do want to see what I'm talking about with more modern day Jordan shoes and what they're doing with the rubber design and kind of how that compares to the Jordan 12, then make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam, as well as incredibly inflated Zoom Air units. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.